Hey Steelers Nation, it's Joe Rocky, the Pittsburgh Syndicate, coming at you with another episode. In today's episode, we're going to be breaking down who is going to be starting at left tackle, what is best for the Steelers, both in the short term and the long run, looking at whether or not the experiment works, which way, and going through all the different variables that could be at our left tackle position. So what spawned this was after the first preseason game, obviously Dan Moore played with the starters and then did not play again. And then rookie Broderick Jones came in and played the rest of the game. And that spawned NFL.com to write an article from Kevin Petraya today, which had all kinds of great quotes from Broderick Jones, essentially saying that he doesn't feel that this is a competition and he'd actually rather kind of feel his way into it than jump into the fire. And I don't know if that's him giving the PR twist to the answer or if that's how he genuinely feels, being that I wasn't the one who asked the questions. But I can say I do believe that this is the best thing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Because as we look at the team dynamic, we are now trying to start pushing the ball further downfield. And the absolute worst thing you can do to start a season is have the quarterback get destroyed and be afraid. So last year, Kirk Cousins of Minnesota led the NFL in times that he was hit. There's a giant difference between having a veteran quarterback getting smashed and a second-year quarterback. We do not want to ruin the confidence of pushing the ball downfield because it's really the only way this offense is going to work successfully and consistently. So the best way to do that is to keep the best pass rushers away from him, which would line up over the rookie by default. And as we look the way that our schedule has lined out, in a lot of ways, every single break happened for the Pittsburgh Steelers. There is one notable exception. Of the elite pass rushers on our schedule, we play them in week 1, 2, and 3. Being Nick Bosa, assuming he will be signed by week 1. I think that's fair. Garrett over in Cleveland, and then Crosby with the Raiders. Those are by far the 3 best pass rushers we will face the entire season by a degree of magnitude until we get to Cincinnati. So it then comes down to the question, who is the best left tackle to put there? Should we put Dan Moore, who essentially last year was a pre-snap penalty machine, or should we put the rookie in? And I contend that we should put Dan Moore in for a lot of reasons. First, he has not lost his job in camp yet. He is actually showing a great degree of stepping himself up and improvement. And being the fact he's still young, that should be expected. And when we look at this, I believe it is better to play who is your best overall player right now today than worry about the downfield potential later. There is no doubt that starting in 2024, that Broderick Jones is your starting left tackle. Zero doubt in any of the discussion I'm about to have. But what I'm saying here is I think Dan Moore might be your better option, at least until the bye, if not for all of 2023. And here's essentially my reasons why you should start him for this. First, if Dan Moore goes out and succeeds, going with the optimistic side of the fence, you now have a left tackle that was successful for an entire season, that was able to fend off the pressures of the 14th pick overall from taking his job. You then, as Khan and the offseason the Steelers have complete and utter power and a logical reason to trade him. Because it's going to be like, we obviously are going to have to play Broderick Jones for the long term. So therefore, trading Dan Moore would make logical sense. Not to mention, in free agency, he's going to want to pay like a starter. We're not paying 3 starters at the tackle position. That's just insane. So therefore, we're going to be willing to trade Dan Moore, which could translate into a first-round pick if he is a left tackle that is highly competent and productive. It also then leads to the option of, okay, cool. You just got essentially a redshirt year for a guy who said he was comfortable with it, at least in the interview by Kevin Petraya today. And you now have had a year of seasoning, a year of getting bigger, all those important things that will just help Broderick Jones in the long run. And there's a lot of first-round picks we've seen in the history of the NFL that getting that first year off really does benefit them downfield, especially with how young Broderick Jones was drafted with, only playing 17 games in college overall. It actually could help getting some more seasoning in the NFL environment. Then the trade-off is, well, Joe, that's a great story if Dan Moore ends up being good. What happens if he's just, average? He's good enough. Well, in that case, I think what realistically would happen is he's going to play until the bye week, and then Broderick Jones comes in thereafter. And knowing that his free agency number is not going to be starter level quality, he essentially becomes your swing tackle. Potentially, he becomes more if Chuk ends up faltering, he goes there. But I think that's realistically, if Dan Moore stays as a Steeler, his most probable outcome. He does good enough, not enough to hold off Broderick Jones the entire season. And then, boom, he's your long term swing tackle, which there is no fault with. Having three quality tackles is a good thing. And Steelers Nation, Dan Moore is a quality tackle. That is a fact. When you watch the rest of the NFL, there are many, many whipping boys that just can't block the edge rushers anymore. Dan Moore's penalties are not normally holdings; they're pre-snap. Mostly him trying to jump off before the rush gets to him. But at the end of the day, he's successful at it. So when we look at the possibility of Dan Moore starting the first 5 games before the bye, and we go, well, what happens if it's an abysmal failure? It is much more likely that Broderick Jones is going to be a failure against those 3 pass rushers, given the fact that he's a rookie, than Dan Moore. And that's just a fact of life. Having seen Garrett before, having seen what elite pass rushers are, it is much more likely that Dan Moore will be able to step up than a rookie. That's just a fact of life. So when we look at this and we say Dan Moore loses, say he lets up 4 sacks across those first 3 games, and then we just shuffle out against Houston and the Ravens, who don't really have an edge rusher, despite the fact Houston drafting that kid from Bama, they don't really have an edge rusher. So when we look at this and say, just stumble him into the bye, let it go, and then he's very cheap to keep as your swing tackle. So I think realistically, the best option of all this scenario is Dan Moore being your starter. Dan Moore taking this as long as he can and rooting for him to have massive amount of success. And I get Steelers Nation that that's not the thing you want to hear. We want to play with the new and shiny object. We want Broderick in there. We want to just know it's done. Listen, at the end of the day, if Dan Moore can give you that, if Dan Moore can give you a season of success and keep Broderick Jones off the bench, it is the absolute best long-term plan for the Pittsburgh Steelers we possibly could have. Because we'd be able to get a much better and additional first-round pick next year. And then on top of it, to get a swing tackle, it's only going to cost you a 3rd or 4th round pick to make it happen anyway. And in fact, the Spencer kid might even already be the answer. So when we look at where the Steelers have positioned themselves moving forward, in so many ways, there's immense talent on this roster that 2 or 3 years ago, you would have been delusional had you thought they'd been able to be this good. Khan deserves to be Executive of the Year already. I mean, it's just a fact of life. So when we look at where we are at here, I do believe Dan Moore is going to produce. I think he's going to shut Bosa down. He has a history of winning against Garrett, and Crosby's a wild card. But at the end of the day, I think he's going to win against Bosa because Bosa's not exactly the same as Watt the way they're doing their hold-ins. When Watt was doing his hold-in, he was working every single day, granted by himself, but you saw him doing progressions. Not so much how the reports of Bosa. Bosa basically sounds like he's standing around. And, to each their own, but there's a reason Watt's no doubt going to be a Hall of Famer. And Bosa maybe. I mean, this is the kind of thing you see here. And if Dan Moore shuts him down in week 1, it goes a long way to winning that game. And I do believe if you win week 1, we have a very good chance of saying, hey, we're 4-1 or 5-0 going into that bye. And then at that point, you don't mess with what's working. Because if you go out there and you can beat the Niners, you have just made a giant statement to the league. We're here. We can score on a real defense, and we can shut down a gimmicky offense that is very well schematically made. And if you can do that, you're in a great position for the season. So this is a long way to say I do believe the Steelers are going to beat the Niners. I do think Dan Moore's going to have a hell of a game, and the Steeler Nation is best off with Dan Moore playing all 17 games plus the playoffs. Here we go, Steelers. Here we go.